every flight, passengers place their lives in the hands of their captain.
And the carriage up?
Who carries them into the sky.
Clear for takeoff, thank you.
And brings them safely back to Earth.
Up to 60.
An epic endeavor carried out by a highly trained man or woman.
The idea of the commander being more of a king, more of a godlike individual who couldn't make a mistake. Nobody's like that.
1972, England. A plane crashes shortly after takeoff.
That can't be right.
In northern Minnesota, a pilot misses the runway, killing everyone on board.
It really was one of the most difficult accident sites I'd ever been to.
Durango, Colorado.
Damn, we're too low.
That was going to be the big mystery here to try to understand.
If the person at the controls is so highly trained, then why did these tragedies happen? Pilots are trained to handle all sorts of external threats and hazards. But sometimes it's the personal problems, impatience, arrogance, incompetence that lead to tragedy. In 1972, the Hawker Siddeley Trident is the pride of British aviation.
Line 548 requesting start.
The crew of British European Airways Flight 548 is completing final preparations for an afternoon flight from London's Heathrow Airport to Brussels.
Looks like the weather's going to give us a bumpy ride today.
Line 548 cleared for start.
Captain Stanley Key was called into work on his day off. Key is a former RAF pilot and one of the airline's most qualified captains.
Starting master.
Captain Key had been on the aircraft for a long time, so he's very experienced, and if you expected to fly with him, you expected to fly to the book and to do it accurately with no argument.
Today, Captain Key has had to wait for another crew catching a lift to Brussels.
Have a seat, Captain. Line 548 ready for takeoff.
Line 548 cleared for takeoff.
548. Maximum thrust. Rotate.
Once the Trident has gained enough altitude, the crew will have to throttle back slightly. They'll be flying over the small town of Staines, which lies very close to the airport.
It's a very noisy engine with a particularly nasty crackle to it, so noise abatement would be an issue.
Crews are required to minimize aircraft noise over populated areas.
Undercarriage up.
First Officer Jeremy Keeley prepares to throttle back the engines. If he does it too soon, the plane won't have enough power to climb.
75 seconds. 90 seconds.
If he's late, the crew will violate noise restrictions. Right on time, Keeley throttles back.
Passing 1,500 feet.
Power clears them to a higher altitude.
Up to 60.
Suddenly,
What's that?
the plane begins to lose altitude and plummets like a rock.
Look at the speed! Look at the speed!
The airspeed dropped quite rapidly. There was then a very high rate of descent. The pilots were just passengers in their own aircraft.
All 118 people on board are killed. The plane missed the town of Staines by a few feet.
This accident was pretty horrifying because it was the worst airline accident that Britain had ever experienced, and BEA was reckoned in those days to be the kind of airline that just didn't have crashes, and this time they did. Flight
from Britain's Accidents Investigation Branch reaches the crash site. Investigators are struck by something unusual. In most accidents, momentum carries the wreckage forward after it hits the ground. The crash at Staines is different. After impact, the tail barely slid forward.
The rest of the aircraft probably hadn't moved forwards more than about 50 yards, which for such a heavy aeroplane is very, very little distance.
It's a sure sign that the plane stalled.
An aircraft stalls when it's flying. When that aircraft hit the ground, it was actually slightly nose up. It was falling through the sky like that.
An airplane can stall for many different reasons, from engine failure to pilot error. To determine the cause of the crash, investigators face a huge hurdle. In 1972, planes in the United Kingdom are not required to carry cockpit voice recorders. Investigators will have to rely on information gleaned from the Trident's flight recorders and the vast jigsaw puzzle of debris salvaged from the wreckage.
Following an impact of this sort, everything is comprehensively wrecked and jumbled up, and most of the components on the aircraft, particularly the electronic components, all look very similar.
Early in the investigation, something doesn't make sense.
That can't be right.
The lever controls the Trident's slats, or droops. Droops increase lift during takeoff to help the plane climb. They should remain extended until the plane has reached the necessary speed to maintain lift. But according to the lever's position at the time of the crash, the droops had already been retracted into the wing. This would have been too soon and would have instantly put the plane into a dangerous stall.
How on earth did somebody manage to retract the droop lever and nobody noticed that that had happened? And it didn't make a lot of sense.
There's no way to tell just by looking at the droop lever whether the crew retracted it before the crash or if it was jostled out of place by the crash itself. It might even have been moved during recovery operations.
Hang on, will you?
We had the whole of the droop system laid out on tables in front of the wing.
Retracted.
They determined by an examination of the wreckage that the droops had been retracted.
There's no longer any doubt. Someone in the cockpit retracted the droop lever much too soon. This prompts urgent questions about the crew's performance. Investigators focus in on the highly experienced Captain Key.
So,
They study the captain's previous flights. He has an impeccable reputation, at least with management.
put up the photo of Key. Now, tray table from the wreckage.
There's a piece of wreckage that raises questions about the captain's reputation with his colleagues.
And there was some graffiti scribbled, which gave a few rather facetious comments, obviously from a pilot.
Said Key must go, and then a few other derogatory comments added as well. There was over 30 years difference between Captain Key and the two other members of his crew, and this produces the natural differences you have between a generation. One who regards the others as old and stuffy, and one who regards youngsters as being young and irresponsible. This produced a generational gap.
Did some kind of generational friction erupt in the cockpit and bring this airplane down? Investigators looking at the crash of BEA Flight 548 want to know what other pilots thought about Captain Stanley Key.
I hear you're someone we should talk to.
Yeah. I need to tell you what happened.
Pilots at British European Airways are on the verge of a strike. Captain Stanley Key is seen by many as a company man.
There was work to rule going on. Most of the co-pilots, included me, were working to rule, and he thoroughly disapproved of this as not being a professional way to behave, and was leading a campaign against it.
According to witnesses, things came to a head 90 minutes before the flight to Brussels.
Captain Key?
Hear the battle starting to go our way. What did you say? I just meant that,
You know that during the war we flew in real battles? Selfish, pampered, Immature crybabies making a lot of ridiculous demands.
Look here, just because your lot flew the war.
You ungrateful bastard! If you're flying that plane for money, then you're in the wrong profession.
I think we better agree to disagree.
Bunch of fools.
The argument is so severe that investigators face a new possibility. Did the captain's agitation interfere with his ability to fly the plane safely?
Bloody fools.
548, climb to flight level 60. Squawk 6615.
Possibly still angry and distracted.
Up to 60.
He might have retracted the droop handle too early without being aware of it. Stalling the plane, triggering alarms.
If you go from what is apparently a normal flight into something which is seriously dangerous, it will produce a shock response. And that means your ability to think clearly and to act decisively is very difficult.
The Trident is not equipped with a cockpit voice recorder, so investigators can't know for sure what happened in the cockpit.
Beeline 548, ready for takeoff.
But the captain's conversations with air traffic control are recorded.
Beeline 548, clear for takeoff 28 right.
548.
These recordings do not reveal if the captain retracted the droop lever too soon, but investigators notice something unusual.
Captain seems awfully quiet.
Up to 60.
The captain's radio call. But these recordings provide no clue about why the captain sounded so restrained.
What was going on in that cockpit?
Then a startling discovery. It turns out Captain Key had a serious heart condition that had not shown up in his regular medical exams.
He had, without even knowing it, a clogging of the coronary arteries.
And unworthy of the wings on your
Look
unit.
here, just because your lot flew the war
And
doesn't...
are you ungrateful bastard?
And the autopsy reveals something else. Pathologists believe that Captain Key suffered heart failure sometime within a 2-hour window before the crash.
Up to 60.
If his blood pressure was particularly high because he was agitated, it might affect his reasoning.
His level of pain would have increased over the period up to a point where he would have become partly or totally incapacitated.
The former RAF pilot was old school. If he was in severe physical distress, he likely carried on and did his duty, never asking his crew for any help. And this raises a parallel question. There were other qualified pilots in the cockpit that day.
What was that?
Why didn't one of them do something to save the plane?
Neither Captain Key nor the other pilots realized that it was the retraction of the droop which had caused the stall, because nobody attempted to put it back down again. If they had done, they could have unstalled the aeroplane.
Investigators keep turning back to that argument before takeoff.
Look here, just because your
And as
lot
for your
flew the
refusal
war...
to fulfill all of your duties...
Investigators learned that an hour and a half before takeoff, co-pilot Jeremy Keeley witnessed Key's outburst.
If you're flying that plane for money, you're in the wrong...
They suspect it made a big impact on the young pilot.
Witnessed an outburst like that, one can only surmise that if you are new to the fleet, you don't know the captain, you're slightly unconfident yourself, you may be nervous of your own performance.
Shaken by his captain's temper,
Bunch of fools.
Keeley may have been far less likely to correct his captain's errors.
It would certainly reinforce the concept that the captain was authoritarian and not somebody that you should challenge lightly, especially on that day.
The crash of BEA Flight 548 was the result of a tragic combination of human factors centered around the captain. Heart failure, a lever moved too soon, and co-pilots too junior or too intimidated to step in when things started to go wrong. Lessons learned from Britain's deadliest air disaster helped to change the industry. Cockpit voice recorders are now standard equipment in almost all commercial passenger planes.
The modern airline is operated very, very differently. The way the crews handles, we've had to build it on the death of 118 people.
In northern Minnesota, a commuter crash kills everyone on board. Investigators think the problem lies in the cockpit.
You have the responsibility as a captain of creating an interactive team to where no one on that team would hesitate to speak up if you saw, heard, felt, or even intuited that something was wrong.
You didn't check the damn exterior.
Northwest Airlink Flight Flight 5719 cruises across the skies of Minnesota. First Officer Chad Erickson is 2 months into his first airline job.
I'm sure that Chad was excited. That was the first step in getting the job that would lead you to the big job, to fly the big iron at big airlines.
This is the first time he's flown a route with an overnight stay.
Do we get our own room? No, you're gonna have to room with me. And it's only a single bed, so you'll have to curl up at my feet. Of course, you get your own room. You're on a contract now.
Erickson's captain is Marvin Farlitz.
The captain grew up in New York City. He was described as having a personality that was somewhat at odds with the Midwestern personality.
Breaking coffee tastes like piss.
He had an issue with dealing with other people.
Captain Farlitz and First Officer Erickson are flying a Jetstream BA-3100, a small twin-engine turboprop.
The Jetstream was a handful to fly, and we had to fly it by hand all the time.
Craig Railsback is a former Northwest Airlink pilot who also flew the BA-3100.
It was fairly unstable. It was like balancing a beach ball on top of a Coke bottle. The upside of flying an airplane like that was you were incredibly proficient. I mean, we got to be really good at instrument flying, and we flew in some really, really difficult, challenging conditions, which, for a young guy, it was great fun.
Flight 5719 left Minneapolis just before 7 p.m. for Hibbing, Minnesota, about an hour away. There are 16 passengers on board. After that, it's scheduled to continue onto a final stop in International Falls.
Twin City 719, Hibbing weather. Sky partially obscured, freezing drizzle.
Hibbing's a small airport that does not have a control tower. At about the 20 miles from the airport, they'll clear you for the instrument approach if the weather is below visual limits. And at that point, once you're cleared for the approach, you're pretty much on your own.
Can't take the ILS 31. Because of I don't like to land with a tailwind anyway. Tell them we'll take the localizer back course to 13.
Hibbing Airport has 2 approaches. The captain decides to approach from what's called the back course. This approach is not equipped with the instruments needed to fully guide the pilots to the runway. It is known as a non-precision approach.
We'd like the back course up to 13.
Roger, proceed. But you're on your own.
Non-precision approaches are, in fact, more demanding than the precision ones for the reason that you have to monitor the descent rate, the descent altitude, the navigation where you are laterally across the ground. So there's actually quite a bit more going on.
Just before 7:50 p.m., Flight 5719 starts descending into the blowing snow of a cold Minnesota night.
Gear down. Gear down. Did you click the airport lights?
In an airport like Hibbing that does not have a lot of traffic, in an effort to save money, because the light bulbs are very expensive, they are what's called pilot-controlled lighting.
You click it?
The pilots, with a series of clicks from their radios, can turn the lights up and down.
Clicked it 7 times. Okay, got it now.
It takes 1 hour for emergency responders to locate the crash site, 2 miles northwest of the airport. There are no survivors. The National Transportation Safety Board sends out investigator John DeLisi.
The wreckage was up on a hill, so it was in a precarious position, and some of the bodies had been ejected. Many were still inside the fuselage. It was the holiday season, so many folks that were traveling traveling had brought Christmas presents. They were scattered in the debris. There was blood in the snow. It really was one of the most difficult accident sites I'd ever been to.
DeLisi knows that a plane this size will
Here's the CVR.
At the time, commuter airplane with 18 or less seats, only a requirement for a cockpit voice recorder, not a flight data recorder.
All right, let's go.
With no FDR, the difficult job of explaining the crash just got harder.
When there's no flight data recorder, it puts us in a bit of an old school type of investigation where the analysis of the physical evidence becomes so much more critical.
DeLisi turns to radar data from approach control to track the plane's descent path. It's very steep and comes late. Investigators can't make sense of it.
The rate of descent was double what we normally see. It should be about 1,000 feet per minute. Now, in this case, it was over 2,000, somewhere times up to 2,200.
Why did they start their descent so late?
Me as a pilot, it does make you wonder, because the later you start the descent, the faster you're going to have to descend to get down. And the faster you descend, the harder it is to break that rate of descent.
Investigators wonder if ice on the wings caused the steep descent and crash.
Buildup of ice, particularly on the wings of an airplane, can kill the lift that the wings are capable of generating. So sometimes an airplane with a rapid rate of descent might be indicative of an out-of-control motion caused by a buildup of ice.
Just wondering if you have a couple of minutes.
Investigators determine icing conditions were moderate and could not have caused the crash. If ice didn't bring the plane down, what did?
And talking to other pilots at Northwest, we began to learn about what they referred to as a slam-dunk approach. A slam-dunk approach described as one in which, while you have to pass through an area of icing, crews want to minimize the time they spend there. So they may hold their altitude close into the airport and then very rapidly do a steep descent to get through the altitudes in which there was icing as quickly as possible. That's not a standard technique, but as we began to hear about it, it matched what we were seeing on the air traffic control radar.
It's something professional pilots deal with a lot, and it requires a lot of skill in aircraft handling to get the airplane down quickly without having the speed go up to an unacceptably high level.
Marvin Falitz was an experienced captain. He should have been more than capable of safely performing a slam-dunk approach. Investigators examine how the pilots on Northwest Airlink Flight 5719 performed a so-called slam-dunk approach. They hope the cockpit voice recording will shed some light.
Before final checklist complete?
It's what is not said that alarms them the most.
Why isn't the first officer making his altitude callouts?
We didn't hear the regular callouts about 2,000, 1,000 feet distance from the airport. It seemed as if the first officer didn't really know what was going on in the approach.
You're down?
Flaps 20.
He never told the captain how close they were getting to the ground.
193.
Investigators need to know what was going on with the novice first officer. Was this tragedy his fault? There are no red flags in his official record. In fact, it's quite the opposite.
ATIS 119. This guy graduated one in his class.
The first officer had prepared index cards with aviation data for every airport that the airline flew to. This was above and beyond what was normally required. He was doing special studying so he could be prepared and be a better pilot.
Why would he not make those callouts? What would cause him not to make those?
So, what do we know about the captain?
Captain Falitz was an experienced senior pilot. A deeper look reveals a man with a troubling record.
Boom, boom, boom.
soon after he joined the company, he failed his oral exam. He failed 2 more proficiency exams in his career. That's unusual for a professional pilot to fail that many times.
Are all these formal complaints against Captain Fallons?
Marvin was the first captain I flew with after my OE, my initial operating experience, and he tended to be a little bit domineering and would berate you and was intolerant of mistakes and really not a particularly great instructor pilot.
Wow.
Perhaps the most disturbing complaint against Captain Fallets is that he once struck a colleague in anger. Is there a link between the captain's belligerence and the first officer's reticence?
Hello?
Investigators receive a phone call from a ramp service agent at Minneapolis Airport.
Why isn't the exterior pre-flight done?
You didn't check the damn exterior lights.
The service agent witnessed...
Gonna check the lights from inside the cockpit.
That's not how you do it. You have to go outside and see it with your own stupid eyes.
Does Northwest even screen you guys anymore?
You know what? Screw it. I'll do it myself.
The captain was being very, very critical of the first officer. And the first officer was a relatively new pilot, so, you're going to make mistakes. So there was a better way to handle it, and the captain did not take the better way.
If we're late for departure, it's on you.
This happened immediately before the flight, so it set the tone for the two of them working together, which was a bad way to do things.
Okay, thanks. Let's get that CDR back in here. We need to find out what was going on between those 2 pilots.
Call company and tell them we need to fuel up.
In listening to the CBR, the captain makes a lot of corrections or directions to the first officer of very simple things.
Op 719.
Say Hibbing.
Hibbing, go ahead.
Hibbing is intimidating and not constructive.
Positive fuel? See you in a bit. You can't just say ops. You have to specify. You're supposed to answer. Hibbing, Sioux City, Duluth.
Before I was an airline pilot, I was a flight instructor. And one guaranteed way to have that guy shut down and not be able to perform was to berate them, humiliate them, embarrass them.
He was paralyzed with fear. That's why he didn't make his call-outs to the captain. He was terrified of him.
Investigators finally understand why Northwest Airlink Flight 5719 ended in tragedy.
You have to go outside and see it with your own stupid eyes.
Well, this accident in many ways has become a case study in just how valuable it is to empower either crew member to be assertive and to speak up when something isn't going right.
Even when the captain isn't a bully, he can suffer from other flaws, hidden from view.
Hey, everybody seated?
Yep, everybody's in.
Folks, this is your captain speaking. We'll soon be landing in Durango.
And eventually those flaws can lead to tragedy.
We had so many examples of people who could not or would not speak up, but it all came down to the shoulders of the captain.
Trans-Colorado 2286, you are cleared for takeoff.
Trans-Colorado is a small regional carrier that operates flights for Continental Airlines.
2286, clear for takeoff. Thank you.
Jovial, energetic pilot. I enjoyed flying with Steve.
You're handling him flying this leg, right?
You bet.
First Officer Ralph Harvey will operate the controls for this flight, leaving the captain free to handle radio calls.
Takeoff power.
Airline pilots routinely trade the flying duties. Part of it is for the reduction of fatigue so that one person's not doing all the work, but it also divides the jobs up so that first officers that will be captains are gaining experience.
100.
The captain keeps an eye on the airspeed as they accelerate for takeoff.
V1. And rotate.
The crew's Crew's day began in Denver. After 2 short hops to Riverton and Casper, Wyoming, they circled back to Denver. Now they're headed to Durango, a route that takes them over the southern Rocky Mountains.
Control will plan on a DME to runway 20.
That's approved. Trans-Colorado 2286 cleared for runway 20 approach at Durango Airport.
Like many small airports in America, Durango does not have its own air traffic control. The controller is in Denver, more than 200 miles away.
Once they cleared you for that approach, they basically gave you the responsibility to get that airplane down on the ground.
Radar coverage terminated. Please report landing by radio. Have a good night.
Gear down. Gear down. 3 green.
Do you have the runway?
Something's wrong. The pilots can't see the runway.
Damn, moving slow! Pull out! No! Hold on!
There was this just big boom. I thought we just had a rough landing. And the plane began to do a flip. That's when I thought, it's happening. We're crashing. They usually say, stay where you are, someone will come and get you. But we were out in the middle of nowhere. We didn't know if anybody knew anything.
Spotters to get there. It took us a long time to figure out exactly where the crash was.
Of the 17 people on board, the crash has killed 9, including both pilots. Tom Houter of the National Transportation Safety Board now faces a huge task.
Yeah, left wingtip right here. Yeah, thanks, guys.
We were having a hard time understanding how the crew impacted so far short of the airport. That was going to be the big mystery here to try to understand.
Investigators wonder whether the approach into the airport was too risky for the conditions that night. The air traffic recording reveals that the controller gave the crew 2 options. The first was to fly an easy path around the airport to a runway equipped with an instrument landing system, ILS, that guides the pilots down. In the second, more challenging option, pilots must descend in steep steps to avoid mountains north of Durango.
We'll plan on using the 20, thank you.
We have hills here, here, and here. Why didn't they take the easy way down?
It's the crew's 4th flight of the day, and they're running late. Captain Silver decides to fly the steeper, more difficult approach.
Listen, when we get to Durango, I'd like to get in the air again as quickly as possible.
Shouldn't be a problem. We won't need to refuel.
Let's see what else we can do to get these folks back on time.
Estimates show that the straight-in approach to runway 20 saves about 10 minutes of flight time.
To me, it seems almost instinctive that he thought this is his way to catch up and get in faster.
Folks, this is your captain speaking. We'll soon be landing in Durango.
The information explains why Captain Silver chose such a challenging approach on a snowy night, but it doesn't explain the crash.
Tricky approach. But lots of pilots say they did it all the time.
Investigators compare the flight path pilots are supposed to follow for runway 20 to the actual descent of flight 2286.
It's quite clear that the crew descended below the bullish approach. Why exactly, we don't know.
In Denver, Malcolm Brenner digs into the qualifications of the 2 pilots on Trans-Colorado Flight 2286. The file of First Officer Ralph Harvey, the pilot who was flying, is cause for real concern.
Tested for captain. Failed. Proficiency test failed. Instrument flying. Below average.
The challenging approach to Durango in limited visibility was more than the first officer could manage.
I think as long as the weather is good, he would probably be a very adequate pilot. His trouble is when things start to happen very fast, it seems like.
For some reason, the captain didn't take over and save the plane. I need to know why.
If the first officer wasn't up to the job, then why didn't Captain Silver step in and take over?
Damn!
The captain and the first officer's performance on Trans-Colorado Flight 2286 baffles investigators. They contact friends and family, trying to piece together what the pilots were doing in the hours leading up to their last flight. They're looking for any sign of stress or fatigue. But as far as anyone can tell, Captain Silver spent a quiet evening with his family, then went home to sleep.
What a day. What are we missing here?
The case seems to have hit a dead end.
Hello?
Until a phone call changes everything.
Yes. What? What a day.
Investigators learn that on the eve of the crash, Captain Silver may not have spent a quiet night alone after all.
Time to have a bit of fun.
Now you're speaking my language.
They hear a story about drug use and a woman who is alleged to have made a stunning admission.
I'm sure glad we buried him right after the accident. The night before, we'd done a bag of cocaine. We did a bag of cocaine. Would you like to go first?
The best way I could describe the investigators was astounded.
Call the lab.
Technicians conduct toxicology tests on samples of the deceased captain of Flight 2286. The results leave no room for doubt.
He wasn't asleep.
He was up, using cocaine.
He was in withdrawal by the time of the accident.
I always thought pilots were squeaky clean. I mean, they are carrying people's lives. They have people's lives in their hands.
A captain suffering withdrawal is also under the gun to get back on schedule.
Listen, when we get to Durango, I'd like to get in the air again as quickly as possible.
Because of his actions, his deliberate actions, he presented himself for duty, not qualified. And that goes against everything that professional pilots are taught.
What a horrible decision. In withdrawal.
Trans-Colorado 2286 for your approach to Durango. Would you rather shoot the ILS, or will the approach to runway 20 be sufficient?
Control, we'll plan on a DME to runway 20.
Already behind schedule, the captain's habit of rushing leads him to choose a challenging approach when an easier option is available. The struggling first officer is soon overwhelmed, but the captain doesn't notice.
Is he on the runway?
Until it's far too late.
Damn, we're too low! No, alert! No! Once they lost track of their altitude, they didn't have a chance.
The NTSB's final report cites the first officer's poor flying and the captain's use of cocaine as contributing causes to the Trans-Colorado crash. The FAA soon implements important changes, including more frequent drug testing for pilots.
To my knowledge, there has not been any other case of drugs involved in an airline accident.
Ego.
You ungrateful bastard!
Intimidation.
That's not how you do it. You have to go outside and see it with your own stupid eyes.
Dereliction of duty.
Time to have a bit of fun.
These are the human flaws that have brought down airplanes and taken lives. These tragedies have instituted a revolution in the relationship between the captain and the flight crew. The godlike figure is gone, and now the plane is flown by a true team.
It's all because we finally understood us. Our failure modes as humans, what we can do correctly 100% of the time and what we can't, and how to use teamwork, even just a team of two, to reduce by just an incredible amount the potential for human error metastasizing into an accident.